I drove back to my hometown for one reason: to sit in the back of my father's Veterans Honor Ceremony and clap like any other daughter. That was the plan. Then I heard the whisper, soft and smug, like it belonged in that room she already left the Navy. My stepmother's laugh followed me through the house. She can't do anything right. I didn't correct her. I didn't defend myself. I didn't even flinch. Because I hadn't come home to argue. I'd come home to let them talk right up until the moment the wrong people said the wrong thing in front of the right uniform. Virginia looks harmless when you haven't seen it in years. Same long stretches of highway, same pine trees, same lawns cut into perfect stripes. The radio found the local station on its own, like the car remembered where I came from, even if I pretended I didn't. Tonight at the Veterans Hall, a bright voice announced we'll be honoring longtime community member Thomas Montgomery. Doors open at 6. Suggested donation supports the scholarship fund. My father's name sounded clean on someone else's tongue. I should have stayed at a hotel. I could have slipped into the hall, sat quietly, and slipped out. But part of coming home is paying the toll. If you want to honor someone, you have to look them in the eye first. I stopped for coffee on Main Street because I needed something warm in my hands. The little cafe was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone's business and called it community. The woman behind the counter stared for a beat too long. "Claire," she asked, surprised I was real. "Hi, Miss Donna." Her eyes tracked the way I stood, straight-backed still, like I was waiting for someone to tell me where to be. Two older men at a corner table paused mid-sentence. "That her," one muttered. "Heard she quit," the other replied. "Couldn't hack it." I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. In a town like this, rumors don't require evidence. They require someone willing to repeat them with confidence. And Evelyn had always been confident. I paid left, the coffee half finished, and drove to my father's house. Evelyn had the front door propped open like she was expecting an audience. The place smelled like lemon cleaner and something sweet, baking her idea of a patriotic home. She appeared in the hallway the second my tires hit the gravel, smile already in place. "Claire," she said, stretching my name. "Well, look who remembered where home is." "Morning." Her gaze swept over my jeans and sweater. Clean, neutral, not the kind of outfit you could accuse of trying too hard. "Oh," she sighed, "that's what you're wearing." "I just got in." "And you're staying dressed like that?" She shook her head as if my clothing was a personal insult. "Tonight is important. Donors, the pastor, Councilman Pierce. Your father wants it perfect." There it was, my father's reputation held out like a leash. "I'm not here to ruin anything," I said. Evelyn stepped closer, lowering her voice to a weaponized whisper. "Your father's nervous," she said. "He's worked his whole life for this, so I don't need distractions." I set my overnight bag by the stairs. "I'm not a distraction." She smiled like she'd won. Then her eyes sharpened. "I heard you left the Navy." I didn't answer. She took my silence and filled it for me. "Such a shame," she said. "If it's true, at least the Navy was something you could point to, something you did that looked respectable." Her gaze flicked toward the dining table where she'd laid out printed programs and place cards like she was planning a wedding. "But if you're not in anymore, then it's just you." The old version of me would have argued. The older me had learned something better: don't wrestle with someone who lives for the fight. "I'm going to help," I said, and walked into the kitchen. My father stood at the counter with a folder open, checking names on a list. Gray in his hair now, same squared shoulders. He looked up, and for a half second I saw the father I used to chase for approval. Then his eyes shifted past me toward Evelyn, and his face tightened. "Claire," he said. "Hi, Dad." "You made it," he replied like he wasn't sure he should sound relieved. "Good." Evelyn leaned in the doorway, arms crossed, supervising the room. "We're on a timeline," she told him. "The hall needs the final seating list by noon." My father nodded and kept his attention on the papers as if they were safer than looking at me. You coming tonight?" he asked without lifting his head. "I'm here, aren't I?" His jaw moved. He wanted to say something else. I could see the words forming and dying. My father wasn't cruel by nature. He was just practiced at avoidance, and Evelyn knew how to use that. Evelyn cut in, sweet as icing. "Of course she's coming. She'll sit quietly. In the back. Won't you, Claire?" I met her eyes. "I'll be there." "Good," she said, satisfied. "Then help me with the dishes." There were always dishes when Evelyn wanted to feel like a martyr. She liked an audience for her exhaustion. I rolled up my sleeves and started washing. Hot water, soap, silence. My father's phone rang. His voice changed when he answered, proud, warmed by admiration. "Yes, sir, thank you. We'll be there early. Family photo, 6 sharp." Family photo. The phrase sat heavy in my chest. Evelyn moved closer to me at the sink, speaking low enough that my father wouldn't have to pretend he didn't hear. "You know, she said your dad tells people you're working up in D.C. now." I kept washing, okay? "That's his way of making it sound better," she continued. "Like you didn't just drift." She dried a plate with slow, deliberate strokes. "People remember things, Claire. They remember when someone leaves, when someone gives up." My father stayed on the call laughing softly at something the person said. He was laughing with a stranger while my stepmother rewrote my life in my ear. Evelyn tipped her chin toward me. "And don't wear anything military tonight, it'll confuse people." Confuse them, or remind them of what she'd been trying to erase. "I understand," I said. She waited for more an argument, a crack, a plea. When she didn't get it, her eyes narrowed. I turned off the water, dried my hands, and stepped outside for air. The American flag on the porch moved in the breeze, steady and indifferent. The neighborhood was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you feel like everyone is watching from behind curtains. I wasn't here to win. I wasn't here to humiliate anyone. I was here to honor my father in the one way I still could, by showing up even when it hurt. But as I stood on that porch, I felt the rumor pressing at my back like a hand. She left the Navy, she quit, she failed. I hadn't told my father details because I couldn't. Some parts of my work weren't dinner table conversation, and some parts were simply mine. When I'd said I'm reassigned, he'd heard I'm done. Evelyn had heard opportunity. In a house like this, the difference between privacy and shame was whatever she decided it was. Inside, Evelyn laughed again, bright and sharp. My father's laughter followed, smaller, easier, like he was grateful someone else was steering. I reached into my pocket and touched a plain, unmarked card, smooth, stiff, official. Not a gift, not an announcement. Just something I carried for situations that went sideways. I slid it back into my pocket. Upstairs, the guest room still had the same view of the backyard. I set my bag on the bed and stared at myself in the mirror. My face looked calm. It always did. Calm was a skill I'd paid for. Downstairs, Evelyn kept talking. She always would. She'd keep shaping the story until she believed it herself. And I would let her. Because tonight in that hall, the story would meet the wrong audience. And my father, who had spent years pretending not to see, would finally have to look. The Veterans Hall hadn't changed since I was a kid, which felt appropriate. Some places freeze themselves on purpose. Brick building, low ceiling, flags arranged with careful symmetry. A glass case of medals and photographs that smelled faintly of polish and dust. By the time we arrived, the parking lot was already filling pickup trucks, sedans, a couple of SUVs with military decals fading under Virginia sun. People my father's age moved toward the entrance in small clusters. Jackets, pressed shoes, shined conversations hovering between nostalgia and comparison. Evelyn stepped out of the car like she owned the evening. "Remember," she murmured to me, smoothing an imaginary crease from her coat, "tonight is about your father." "I know." She gave me a glance sharp enough to imply that my agreement was suspicious. Inside, the air carried that familiar blend of coffee, old wood, and expectation. A folding table near the entrance held name tags and donation envelopes. A young volunteer smiled mechanically as we passed. "Oh, Thomas Evelyn," someone called. My father straightened instinctively, his posture shifting into the version reserved for public admiration. Hands reached for his. Voices wrapped him in warmth. "Congratulations, Tom. Well deserved. Proud night." I stepped aside, naturally drifting to the margins. It wasn't bitterness. It was training and habit. Let the celebrated be celebrated. Still, I felt the eyes. Recognition, curiosity, judgment disguised as concern. I moved toward the back wall where the light softened and conversations blurred into background noise. From there, I could see everything without becoming part of it. "That's his daughter, right? Heard she left the Navy. Such a pity. Thomas must have taken that hard." The words floated casually like they were discussing weather. I kept my expression neutral. Across the room, Evelyn laughed too loudly at something a councilman said, her hand resting lightly on my father's arm. She had mastered the art of proximity, always close enough to be seen as indispensable. Thomas looked proud, relaxed even. It struck me how easily a man could look whole in public while something quieter unraveled at home. A group of older veterans settled into the front rows. One of them glanced back at me, squinting. "That Montgomery girl," he whispered. Another man nodded. "Yeah, didn't stick around long from what I hear." "Kids these days," someone muttered. I had stayed longer than most. But facts are no match for narrative. The program began with small-town ceremony precision. The MC welcomed guests. A local pastor offered a brief invocation. A high school ROTC student recited the pledge, voice trembling with nerves and sincerity. Evelyn watched everything with hawk-like attention, scanning for imperfections that might reflect poorly on her orchestration. I remained where I was. Invisible. Comfortable in invisibility. Until Evelyn decided otherwise. She approached with the soft glide of someone pretending kindness. "Claire," she said, already holding a silver tray of drinks. "There you are." I turned. Up close, her smile didn't reach her eyes. "We're short on hands," she continued. "Would you mind?" The tray hovered between us. On it, plastic cups of iced tea and water beads of condensation forming slow trails down the sides. A simple request. A deliberate humiliation. She leaned closer. "If you're not going to sit with family," she whispered, "you might as well be useful." For a moment the room seemed to hold its breath, not because anyone heard, but because something in me did. Revenge stories love dramatic refusals. Real life rarely offers them. I took the tray. "Of course," I said. Her satisfaction was instantaneous. "Oh, good," she replied, voice bright again. "I knew you'd understand." "Understand what?" "My place? My punishment. My role in her version of the evening." I moved through the hall, slowly offering drinks. Most people accepted without really looking at me. A few did double takes. "Oh, thank you. Claire, right, you're helping out." "Helping out?" I nodded politely. A woman my mother's age gave me a sympathetic smile. "Your father must be so proud you came," she said. "Yes, ma'am." "And what are you doing these days, dear?" There it was. The question Evelyn had carefully primed into the room. "I work in D.C., I replied. The woman tilted her head. "Oh, with the Navy." Her smile flickered uncertain. I offered the tray again before she could finish. Across the room, Evelyn was watching. Always watching. Near the stage, my father laughed at a story someone told, his face lit by admiration. He looked younger when people praised him. Lighter. I wondered if he had ever looked at me that way. I wondered if tonight might have been different if I'd explained years ago instead of choosing silence. But silence had never been the problem. Interpretation was. I returned to the back of the hall tray, still half full. Evelyn intercepted me again. "Oh no," she said lightly. "Not back here, front section." "I'm fine." "It'll look odd," she replied. "Family hiding in shadows." "Family." She said it like an accusation. She gently redirected me toward the aisle closest to the stage. Every step forward felt like stepping deeper into someone else's script. The MC cleared his throat. "And now," he announced, "we'd like to recognize a very special guest joining us this evening." The doors at the rear of the hall opened. Late arrival. Heads turned. A ripple moved through the room. The man entering wasn't local. That much was obvious. The posture, the uniform, the way conversations died mid-sentence. Dress whites? Rows of ribbons. Presence that altered the air. Evelyn's eyes widened, then sharpened. Opportunity. She adjusted her smile, already preparing to attach herself to the moment. Admiral Miller, the MC, continued, voice tinged with awe. My father straightened instantly. Pride and nerves colliding in his expression. Admiral Miller began walking down the center aisle, exchanging nods with veterans, offering brief handshakes. Evelyn leaned toward my father. "Perfect," she whispered. But halfway down the aisle, Miller's pace changed. Slowed. Stopped. His gaze shifted not toward the stage. Not toward Thomas. Toward me. I stood frozen, tray still in my hands. For a fraction of a second, confusion flickered across Evelyn's face. Then Admiral Miller stepped out of the aisle and walked directly toward the back corner of the hall, toward the woman everyone believed had already left the Navy. The tray suddenly felt heavier. The room quieter. Something irreversible beginning to move. Admiral Miller didn't hesitate. That was the first thing I noticed. No polite detour, no glance toward the stage where my father stood glowing under borrowed importance. no acknowledgement of Evelyn, who had already arranged her face into a welcoming expression. He walked straight toward me, through rows of folding chairs, past veterans who instinctively shifted aside, past conversations that collapsed into silence mid-word. The tray in my hands felt absurd now, a prop from a joke no one understood yet. For a split second I considered the possibility he hadn't recognized me, that this was coincidence. Then I saw his eyes. Locked. Certain. I set the tray down on the nearest table, movements calm, controlled, years of discipline compressing into muscle memory. Stand straight, shoulders back, chin level. Admiral Miller stopped 2 steps away. And then he did something that cracked the entire room open. He came to attention. The gesture was sharp, unmistakable. A full formal salute. Directed at me. Gasps weren't loud. They were inhaled, collective, stunned. I returned the salute. Not theatrically. Not proudly. Simply correctly. Only then did he lower his hand and step forward, extending his right. "Rear Admiral Montgomery," he said, voice steady but warm with recognition. "I didn't expect to see you here." The title landed like a physical force. Rear Admiral. Not whispered. Not implied. Spoken clearly into the stunned air of a Virginia Veterans Hall. His hand closed around mine in a firm professional shake. Behind him, someone dropped a program. The sound echoed. My mind registered movement before my ears caught the command. Attention! It came from a Navy commander near the front row's reflex, overriding disbelief. Chairs scraped. Fabric shifted. More than 200 people, veterans, active duty personnel, reservists, rose almost simultaneously. The room transformed in an instant. Casual gathering to military space. Hands lifted in salute. Eyes forward. Silence absolute. Out of the corner of my eye I saw Evelyn. Completely still. Her face had lost all animation color, draining so quickly it looked unreal. My father was worse. Thomas Montgomery, respected veteran, tonight's honoree, stared at me like he was trying to reconcile 2 incompatible realities. His daughter. Rear Admiral. The girl who left the Navy. Admiral Miller released my hand but did not step away. "You look well," he continued, conversational, as though we weren't standing inside a social earthquake. "How was the transition?" "Smooth," I replied. Because that was the answer. Because anything longer would have felt like explanation. And explanation was suddenly unnecessary. Miller nodded. "I heard excellent things about your work," he said. "Congratulations." The words were professional, but the implication was devastating. He wasn't revealing a surprise rank earned in secret fantasy. He was acknowledging a known fact. Something the Navy knew. Something Washington knew. Something my own family did not. The MC stood frozen near the microphone, mouth slightly open, script forgotten. No one knew where to look. At Miller. At me. At Thomas. At Evelyn. My father's lips parted, but no sound came out. Shock is rarely dramatic. It's disorienting. Like language stops working. Admiral Miller finally turned toward the stage. "I apologize for the interruption," he said calmly to the room. "Please." But the damage or revelation was complete. People sat slowly, uncertainly, eyes still darting. Whispers began again, but now they carried a different tone. What did he say? Rear Admiral Montgomery, her. Evelyn's gaze found me across the hall. For the first time since I'd arrived home, she had no expression prepared. No script. No social maneuver. Just naked calculation and fear. Admiral Miller stepped toward the stage to greet my father. Thomas extended his hand, automatically, movement stiff, dazed. "Sir," my father managed. Miller shook his hand with polite respect. "Thomas, congratulations on tonight's recognition." My father nodded, but his eyes kept flicking back toward me, as if confirming I hadn't vanished, as if this might still resolve into misunderstanding. Evelyn rushed forward, then recovery instincts kicking in. "Admiral Miller," she beamed, voice suddenly honeyed. "What an honor. I'm Evelyn Thomas's wife." Miller turned courteously. "Ma'am?" Her hand fluttered toward me. "You know, Claire," she said with brittle brightness. "Thomas's daughter." There was a subtle shift in Miller's posture. A flicker. Recognition layered with something unreadable. "Yes," he said evenly. "I do." 3 simple words. But Evelyn heard the subtext. Not polite acquaintance. Not vague familiarity. Knowledge. History. Respect. Her smile faltered. Well, she laughed lightly. We're just so proud she could attend, even after everything. Everything. The word hung there like bait. Miller's eyes hardened almost imperceptibly. Rear Admiral Montgomery's presence, he said calmly, is never a casual matter. The correction was surgical. No accusation. No hostility. Just fact. Evelyn's face tightened. My father's head snapped toward her. Toward Miller. Then toward me. Rear Admiral. Not Claire. Not daughter. Rear Admiral. The ceremony limped forward, though forward felt like fiction. The MC stumbled through introductions. Applause came late, uneven. No one was listening. The room's gravity had shifted permanently. Every glance toward my father now carried a new layer. How did he not know? Every glance toward Evelyn. What exactly had she been saying? I remained at the back. Still. Composed. But inside something colder than anger settled into place. Not triumph. Not satisfaction. Something closer to inevitability. My father's speech arrived. He stood at the podium, hands gripping the edges like they were the only solid objects left in the world. He began, voice rough. He stopped. Cleared his throat. Tried again. Tonight, he said slowly, I'm honored. But the words sounded distant, mechanical. Because behind the pride, behind the gratitude, one truth had detonated. His daughter had not failed. His daughter had not quit. His daughter had simply chosen silence. And he had chosen to believe someone else. Halfway through the speech, his eyes met mine. For a long second. Raw confusion. Regret beginning to surface. Evelyn stared straight ahead, jaw locked, as though refusing to acknowledge the fracture spreading beside her. When the applause came, it was loud but different. Respectful. Distracted. Curious, because Thomas Montgomery was no longer the most interesting story in the room. I was. And Evelyn knew it. Oh, she knew it. Because the whispers had turned. And this time they weren't about me. They were about her. The applause faded into something brittle. Not silent, silence would have been kinder, but that strained murmur a room makes when everyone is pretending nothing irreversible has just happened. My father stepped down from the podium to a line of handshakes that now felt ceremonial rather than celebratory. Smiles lingered a fraction too long. Eyes slid past him toward me. Evelyn stayed glued to his side. Her grip on his arm had changed. Before it was possessive. Now it was stabilizing. As though she were the one keeping him upright. I remained near the back wall where the evening had begun unraveling. A young Navy lieutenant approached hesitantly, posture rigid with uncertainty. Ma'am, he said quietly. I nodded. May I take that for you? Only then did I realize I was still standing beside the abandoned tray. He lifted it carefully like it carried significance beyond plastic cups and melting ice. Thank you, Lieutenant. His eyes flicked up, searching my face for something pride, irritation, superiority. He found none. Yes, ma'am. Across the hall I felt my father watching. That look, I remembered it from childhood, the expression of a man realizing he had missed something essential. He broke away from the crowd. Walked toward me. Slowly. Each step seemed heavier than the last. Claire, he said. My name sounded unfamiliar in his mouth. Dad. Up close, the shock was still written across his features, pride and disorientation wrestling for control. I don't understand, he admitted. No accusation. No anger. Just bewilderment. You said you left. I said I was reassigned. His brow furrowed, replaying memory. You told me you were moving on. I said I was transferred. Behind him, Evelyn appeared, drawn by instinct, by fear of unsupervised conversation. There must be some mistake, she interjected quickly, voice too bright, too tight. Thomas, honey, maybe he meant someone else. Admiral Miller, still near the stage, turned sharply. There is no mistake, he said. The room's attention snapped back again. My father looked between us. Between reality and narrative. Rear Admiral, he asked me quietly, as though saying it softly might make it less destabilizing. Yes? The word felt simple. Clean. Unadorned. Evelyn laughed, a thin, brittle sound. Well, she said, clapping her hands lightly, isn't that something? No congratulations. No apology. Only recalculation. How long, my father asked. A while. How long, Claire? Long enough. Pain flickered across his face. Because beneath the shock lay something worse. The realization that his daughter had risen far while he remained convinced she had drifted. And that conviction hadn't come from nowhere. Evelyn shifted beside him. Thomas, she said gently, we shouldn't do this here. But here was exactly where truth had chosen to surface. I told you, my father murmured, eyes still fixed on me. I asked you what you were doing in D.C. And I told you I was working. You let us believe. I held his gaze. I didn't correct Evelyn. The sentence landed like a quiet blade. My father's head turned slowly toward his wife. Evelyn's expression hardened. Oh, don't start, she snapped. The sweetness was gone now. Evelyn, he said, voice low-strained. What she shot back, everyone thought the same thing. No, Admiral Miller said evenly from across the hall. They didn't. Every eye swung toward him. He walked closer, presence now heavy with something colder than ceremony. Claire Montgomery's record, he continued calmly, has never been ambiguous. Montgomery. Not Claire. Not Rear Admiral. Full name. Full weight. Evelyn's face paled again. Well, she scoffed, folding her arms, forgive me for not having access to classified personnel files. The sarcasm came fast, reflexive defense. I spoke before Miller could. You didn't misunderstand, I said quietly. The hall seemed to lean inward. You told people I left, I continued. Evelyn's jaw tightened. You told my father I couldn't handle it. Because that's what it looked like. No, I replied evenly, that's what you said. My father stared at her. Memory rearranging itself in real time. Conversations revisited. Comments reinterpreted. How many times, he asked her softly, did you tell me Claire quit? Evelyn's silence was answer enough. You never corrected it, I added. I was protecting you, she snapped. From what? From embarrassment? The word echoed harshly. Evelyn realized too late how it sounded. My father recoiled slightly. Embarrassment, he repeated. She never talked about anything. Evelyn fired back, desperation sharpening her voice. Always secretive, always distant. What was I supposed to think? That my privacy was failure. That silence meant success, she countered. Admiral Miller's gaze moved between us. Studying. Measuring. He didn't intervene. He didn't need to. Because the unraveling was no longer military. It was familial. Public. Irreversible. My father looked at me again, eyes raw, now stripped of defensiveness. Why didn't you tell me, he asked. The question carried years inside it. Because here was the deeper wound. Not rank. Not rumors. But distance. I tried, I said quietly. He flinched. Every time we spoke, I continued, you asked for details I couldn't give. I'm your father. And I'm a naval officer. Pain passed through his expression. And when I couldn't explain, I said Evelyn explained for me. The truth hung there. Heavy. Unavoidable. My father turned fully toward his wife. Did you ever tell me Claire was reassigned? Evelyn's eyes flashed. I told you what made sense. What made sense to you, he corrected. A long, stunned silence followed. Because Thomas Montgomery, who had spent years avoiding confrontation, was finally standing inside one. I was proud of you, he whispered to me. I know. I thought you... His voice broke. I thought you gave up. Revenge isn't always loud. Sometimes it's this. A father forced to face the cost of believing the easier story. Evelyn stepped backward slightly, as though distance might soften the shift in power occurring beside her. Thomas, she said, voice trembling, now you can't seriously blame me for... Enough, he said. The word was quiet, but absolute. The room froze again. Because men like my father rarely said that word. And never to Evelyn. He turned back to me, eyes glassy. I owe you an apology. The sentence cracked something deep inside my chest, not because I wanted it, but because I had stopped expecting it. You owe yourself honesty, I replied. Evelyn's face twisted. Oh, please, she scoffed. Are we really doing the noble speech now? No one laughed. No one moved. Because whatever control Evelyn believed she had carried into that hall had evaporated. And she knew it. I looked at her one last time. Calm. Unblinking. No speeches, I said softly. Just consequences. Her breath caught. My father closed his eyes briefly, as though something long denied had finally painfully aligned. The ceremony ended the way most small-town ceremonies do, with coffee, polite laughter, and people pretending they hadn't just witnessed something they'd be talking about for years. Only tonight the conversations had teeth. Clusters formed in corners, heads leaned close. Glances flicked between my father, Evelyn, and me like spectators tracking the aftermath of a quiet explosion. I didn't linger for congratulations. There were plenty offered. "Ma'am, it was an honor. We had no idea. Your father must be proud." Proud. The word landed differently now, because across the hall Thomas Montgomery looked like a man carrying two weights at once: public recognition and private reckoning. Evelyn stood beside him, but something fundamental had shifted. She was no longer the axis, no longer the conductor of the room. People greeted her with courtesy, but not warmth. Respectful distance had replaced social admiration. Consequences had already begun. Outside, the Virginia night felt sharp and clean. The air carried that faint winter edge that wakes you up whether you want it or not. My father found me near the parking lot. No crowd. No Evelyn. Just him. Claire. I turned. For the first time that day, there was no performance in his face. Only exhaustion. "I can't." He stopped, rubbing a hand across his jaw. "I don't know where to begin." "You already did." He gave a hollow, humorless laugh. "I spent years thinking I understood my own daughter." "You understood the version you were given." His shoulders sagged. "I should have asked harder questions." "You did." "I should have listened to the answers." That one hurt. Because it was true. We stood there under the parking lot lights, father and daughter suspended between history and something fragile that might still be repaired. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. Not the ceremonial apology. Not the embarrassed one. The real one. "I'm sorry I believed you gave up. I'm sorry I didn't see what was happening. I'm sorry I let someone else define you to me." Anger would have been easier. Anger has structure. This was grief. "I didn't tell you everything I said." "I know." "I couldn't." "I know." The repetition sounded broken, like a man replaying regret. "I thought you were ashamed," he admitted. Of what? Of leaving. "I never left." He nodded slowly, swallowing hard. "I see that now." Silence stretched between us, but it wasn't hostile anymore. Just heavy. Human. Behind us, the hall doors opened. Evelyn stepped out, scanning the lot eyes landing on us. Even at a distance, I could see the calculation returning. But the confidence was gone, replaced by something brittle. My father didn't turn toward her. That more than anything told me the night had truly changed him. "Come home," he said suddenly. I was home. He winced. Stay, tonight." I studied his face. "I don't think Evelyn wants that." "I don't care what Evelyn wants." The words came sharp, unfiltered, new. Shock flickered through me. Men like my father don't change loudly. They change in sentences like that. Evelyn approached, heels striking the pavement with controlled urgency. "Thomas," she said tightly, "we need to talk." "We are talking." "Privately." "There's nothing private left, Evelyn." Her eyes flashed toward me. "This is exactly what I meant," she hissed. "Drama, spectacle." My father's voice hardened in a way I had never heard directed at her. "Stop." One word. But it landed like a slammed door. Evelyn froze. "You humiliated my daughter," he continued quietly. "She humiliated me," Evelyn snapped back. "Standing there letting everyone think she was some kind of saint while I—" "No," he cut in. "You humiliated yourself." The truth was surgical. Evelyn's face twisted. "I was protecting you." From what he demanded. "From embarrassment." "There is no embarrassment in honorable service." Her mouth opened. Closed. Because the room full of witnesses was gone. And the narrative no longer held. "I won't argue with you tonight," my father said, voice low, shaking slightly with contained emotion. "Not after what you did." Evelyn stared at him, stunned less by the accusation than by the refusal to retreat. "You're choosing her over me." "I'm choosing reality over fiction." The sentence ended something. Not dramatically. Not loudly. But definitively. Evelyn's composure fractured. Tears gathered, sudden strategic familiar. But my father didn't soften. Didn't reach for her. Didn't apologize for her pain the way he always had. "Go home, Evelyn," he said. Her breath caught. "You can't be serious." "I am." She looked at me, then raw hatred flashing through carefully maintained civility. "This is what you wanted," she whispered. I met her gaze calmly. "I wanted respect." She scoffed through trembling lips. "You wanted revenge." I didn't answer. Because revenge had already happened. Without shouting. Without cruelty. Without theatrics. Truth had done the work. Evelyn turned and walked to the car alone. The slam of the door echoed across the lot. My father exhaled slowly as though he'd been holding his breath for years. I should have done that sooner. Yes? I was afraid. I know. He gave a weak, pained smile. You always did. We drove back to the house in silence. Not strained. Just tired. Inside the living room, lights glowed softly. The house felt different now, as if some invisible pressure had lifted. My father poured 2 bourbons. Handed me one. We sat on the porch. 2 silhouettes against a Virginia night. I missed so much, he said quietly. You're here now. I don't deserve your forgiveness. This isn't about deserving. He stared into his glass. I let pride get in the way. You let doubt get louder than trust. He nodded slowly. I want to fix this. You can't fix the past. I can fix what comes next. That was the first honest thing he'd said all day. I looked at him, really looked at him. Older. Smaller somehow. But finally unshielded. Then start with listening, I said. He nodded. I will. And boundaries. His jaw tightened. Yes. We sat there a long time. No accusations. No speeches. Just the quiet recalibration of a relationship that had nearly collapsed under misunderstanding and manipulation. When I stood to leave, he looked startled. You're going? I have work. You just got here. I came for the ceremony. Pain flickered across his face. Then acceptance. Will you come back? Yes. Not dramatic. Not emotional. Just true. He stood pulling me into a hesitant, unfamiliar embrace. My father had never been good at hugs. But this one held something fragile and sincere. I am proud of you, he whispered. I believed him. That was the real ending. Not Evelyn's humiliation. Not the salute. Not the rank. But that sentence. Spoken without audience. Spoken without ego. Spoken as a father. I drove away just after midnight. The road stretched dark and empty ahead. In the rearview mirror, the house grew smaller, porch light still burning. Not a victory. Not a triumph. Something quieter. Cleaner. Revenge had arrived, yes, but not as destruction. As correction. As consequence. As truth finally given the microphone. And if this story leaves you with anything, let it be this. Silence is not weakness. Dignity is not surrender. And the sweetest form of revenge is living so honestly that those who misjudged you must confront the weight of their own words. If this story resonated with you, I invite you gently to reflect on the moments when silence hid strength, when patience outlasted judgment, and when truth arrived without raising its voice. Share your thoughts, share your stories, and if you'd like to hear more journeys like this, you're always welcome to stay.